growth is hard when you don't even know who you are. Take a look inside. The rabbit hole goes deep and wide. Find truth or a lie. It's not so easy to decide when you've lost your ground and your head spins like.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
A new world order where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom.
Today, the military-industrial complex is marching towards world dominance through space technology on behalf of the global corporate interests. To find out how and why the space program will be used to fight all future wars on Earth and from space, it's important to go back in time to understand how the public has been misled about the origins and true purpose of the space program.
We really want to understand what's going on in space today and what's happening with the plan to put weapons in space. I think it's instructive to go back and understand the origins of the US space program. And to do that, you have to go back to Nazi Germany. Hitler recruited a brilliant young rocket scientist by the name of Wernher von Braun, who had a weekend rocket club, to come to work for the Nazis to build the V-1 and V-2 rockets that were used to terrorize the cities of London and Paris and Brussels towards the end of World War II. And for von Braun and his team, they set up along the Baltic Sea a place called Peenemünde. It was a research and development center for the Nazi rocket operation. And to this place at Peenemünde, the Nazis brought thousands of Jews and French resistance fighters to serve as prisoners, essentially slaves, to build this production effort. Well, the British found out about it, went in and bombed the entire operation. And so the Nazis said, we've got to move to a more secure location. And down inside of central Germany, there's a mountain chain called the Harz Mountains. And in that mountain, there's a huge tunnel where the Nazis were storing military hardware. Well, they cleared the whole thing out, moved the entire rocket operation into the tunnel, named it Mittelwerk. And just outside the mountain tunnel at Mittelwerk, the Nazis built a brand new concentration camp called Dora. And to Dora, the Nazis brought 40,000 Jews, gypsies, French resistance fighters, homosexuals, communists, even a black American GI were brought there to serve as slaves for the operation. Well, inside the mountain tunnel, the slaves began to sabotage the operation. They left screws unturned. They urinated on the wires, so that when von Braun and his team were launching the rockets, they were going haywire. And so they sent their team in to find out who was doing this. They identified 100 of the slaves and summarily hung them in front of everyone as a warning that you will not interfere with this operation. Well, eventually the Allies even closed in on this place too. And on the day that they did, von Braun and his team fled for the hills, knowing that if they were captured here, they would be accused of crimes against humanity. One of the first to arrive at this place was an 18-year-old American GI by the name of Hugh Carey, who later became governor of New York State. And he said when they arrived, what they discovered lying at their feet was thousands and thousands and thousands of dead bodies. And come to find out, 25,000 of the 40,000 slaves at this place perished at the hands of the Nazis. Well, you know, immediately after the war, the US and the Allies created the Nuremberg trials, at which time we brought the Nazis to justice for their crimes against humanity. But 1,500 of the top Nazis never went to trial. They were smuggled into the United States by the U.S. military under a program called Operation Paperclip, smuggled in through Boston and West Palm Beach, Florida. And Wernher von Braun and his rocket team, 100 of them, along with 100 copies of the V-2 rocket, were sent to Huntsville, Alabama, where von Braun became the first director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. What's interesting is the other 1,400 Nazis. Who were they? Well, some of them were brought to the United States to work for the CIA. Others were brought to the United States to do the LSD drug experiments and the MK Ultra mind experiments during the 1960s, where people were jumping out of windows. Some of the Nazi scientists that in Germany had been taking Jews and putting them in freezing temperatures to see how the body would react to that were sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and were put in charge of the U.S. military flight medicine program. And so when you take 1,500 of the top Nazi scientists and essentially seed the military-industrial complex, the question I have is, do they bring with them an ideological contamination?
It's very clear the American government does not want the American people protected against nuclear
Took it all
war.
away. They shut them down,
took it away. And the reason is they want us held hostage and helpless when this preemptive strike comes, which they are willfully inducing.
And who has said, excuse me, Joel, but who has said twice, ladies and gentlemen, that they are planning to wage and to win a thermonuclear war with the United States? The number 2 man in the People's Liberation Army. Okay?
That's right. And Russian leaders have said that several times as well. Now, not as openly as the PLA generals have said it, but clearly the Russians in building their underground bunkers. And these aren't just for military.
Oh, they're huge. They ring Moscow. There are 10 or 12 of them. They're huge.
Well, but even the one in the Urals, Yamato Mountain and Yezvinsky Mountain, 2 underground bunkers the size of the Washington, D.C. metro area underground. Right. Now, we're talking about the size of Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Vienna, clear down all around that ring of cities around Washington, D.C. That's underground, that size of a city. And that's not just a military bunker. That's almost 15 times bigger than Cheyenne Mountain. My analysis says they're putting factories underground. They intend to not only win a war, but to continue to wage.
The American public has been left bald-faced, naked, vulnerable. Totally. With intent by administration after administration.
But the purpose of that has to do with this globalist agenda of forcing the United States, its citizens, into a patriotic war, but without the U.S. military prosecuting the war. In other words, the secret genius of inducing a military strike against our spread-out military around the world is that everyone in the world who's now depending on the U.S. to be the policeman of the world has this sense of hopelessness, of panic when this attack occurs. What do we do? And, our leaders come out of their new bunkers that they've been building. There's the huge one under the Naval Observatory from the Vice President and his staff, and there's several other huge bunkers that have been built under high-rise office buildings in Washington, D.C. They know that Mount Weather's going to get hit and several other bunkers, and so they've really been building other ones. I mean, we have out in the West Desert of Utah big underground bunkers that have been built. I'm convinced that they're not going to be using Cheyenne Mountain as the main defense side because it's going to be
too big
compromised.
Of a target. Yeah, sure it will.
It's too big of a target.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff is being moved out of Cheyenne Mountain now into Peterson Air Force Base and another Air Force Base in Colorado Springs in undefended, non-bunkerized areas. I mean, that's a dead city.
Out of these troubled times, our 5th objective, a new world order.
Most people think that the U.S. has 130,000